Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. To the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 479 for the 23rd of Adar in a regular year. And today we are beginning chapter 37, a new chapter. Before we begin, I want to ask you guys a question. Imagine that you were hired by Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, any of these really big companies back in the day when they were first starting out. And they gave you two options. They said you can be a salaried employee, or we can pay you in stocks. You can have a part of our company as your payment. Knowing what you know now, let's say you had the ability to see into the future somehow, and you were able to see what these companies would have become. Which form of payment would you prefer? I'm hoping if you are intelligent enough, you would pick stocks and you would not just pick the salaried employee, because no matter how high your salary is, I think we can pretty much guarantee that owning stock in any of these companies from back in the day when they were first getting started was probably a lot more valuable. Another way to maybe think about this is in terms of mining. Let's say if you were very skilled at being a gold miner, if a mining company hired you, would you prefer that they pay you an hourly rate for the amount of time that you are working? Or would you prefer to be paid in the gold that you uncover in your mining process? So most likely, again, you would pick that gold that you are uncovering. And nowadays, maybe a more applicable and contemporary example would be Bitcoin mining. So people who mine Bitcoin, the way that they get paid is with Bitcoin itself. So it's not like they're just getting some random paycheck. They are getting paid in Bitcoin. It's true they don't get to keep all of the Bitcoin that they mine, but they are getting paid in Bitcoin. So it's a similar idea. So what all of these examples really point to is this thing that the highest form of reward for your labor really resides and really is the results of your labor itself. So you're putting in a certain amount of time into a company, and that company is becoming profitable because of you. You should see those profits. You don't want to just be an hourly employee. Not to diss hourly employees. I know there's a lot of value in that as well. But as we'll see today, when we're talking about Torah and mitzvahs, and that's the topic of today's Tanya, the amazing thing about the reward that we get from the Torah and mitzvahs that we do is that it actually is a lot more similar to the stockholder or to the miner who gets to keep the gold that they uncover than it is to the paid hourly employee. So how is this so? Is, as we'll learn in the Tanya of today, basically every single time that we do a mitzvah, which is basically our work for Hashem, right? It's like as if we are the Hashem's employees. It's not like Hashem just gives us like a nice little token and salary of some sort, like of some kind. The reward that we get for doing that mitzvah is contained within the mitzvah itself. So it's like basically what that means is that on kind of like a cosmological level, every time we do a mitzvah, we are kind of the same way that a miner is uncovering the gold that's inherent in the ground, or an employee of Apple or Google is uncovering the value inherent within the company. When we do mitzvahs for God's mitzvahs, we are uncovering the reality of godliness here in the world. And then we'll also learn that the effect isn't only on the world, but it's actually on our very selves, on our egos, otherwise known as our animal souls, the way that we tend to perceive ourselves, that this ego that we have, this animal soul, as we've mentioned previously in the Tanya, well, it tends to get a negative rap. It actually has a very profound purpose to it. Because in order to do these physical mitzvahs, in order to do the will of God, we need the animal soul. We need the physical body in order to accomplish these things. The godly soul cannot do it on its own. And then in the process, then the animal soul actually, not only is it just being used sort of like a slave to the godly soul, but the animal soul benefits as well. The animal soul gets this equity, so to speak, that we've been talking about. It gets transformed. One of the ways to describe this transformation that occurs within the animal soul, which we'll see towards the end of today's Tanya, is that forgetfulness gets eradicated. So there's this idea that we'll learn that the origin of forgetfulness is actually in the klipos, in those forces which conceal godliness, which, usually the animal soul is dominated by. So when we actually use the animal soul for godly purposes by doing the mitzvahs, a nice side effect of it is that it actually can eradicate forgetfulness. So let's get into the text and see how the Alter Rebbe explains all of this. Again, for context, we're beginning a new chapter 37 today, and we'll be learning the entirety of this first section of the chapter. So let's get straight into the text and see how the Alter Rebbe explains this, and hopefully it will become clear. So the Alter Rebbe says that here, the completion of this purpose of the times of Mashiach and the resurrection of the dead, which is what we started talking about in the last chapter, which is, what is this Mashiach? What is this Tchias HaMesim, this revelation of the dead? This is the revelation of the infinite light of God in this physical world. And what is this dependent upon? How does this revelation of God's light in this physical world come about? It's the mitzvah itself. Because through doing the mitzvah itself, a person draws down the revelation of godly light, of the infinite light, from above to below, to become vested in this physicality of this physical world, into something that in the beginning, it started out as being under the dominion of the klipas noga. So remember, we talked about klipas noga. That's like the husks, the shells that are translucent, so they can be transformed, but yet they are shells. And that it receives its vitality from these husks and shells. And then the Alter Rebbe reviews here, what are these things that are under the dominion of Klipas Noga? These are all the things that are pure in actuality, and they're allowed. So there's nothing wrong with them. They're not like impure things. And we can do them. We are permitted to do practical mitzvahs with them. So for example, this could be like the strap of a tefillin, or a mezuzah, or a sefer Torah. And then here, the Alter Rebbe cites the Gemara in Masechet Shabbos, page 108a, which says, Lo chshar lemenechet shamayim ela teorim umtarim beficha, which literally means, for the work of heaven, only that which is pure and permissible to eat may be used. So meaning to say, basically in plain English, we're only allowed to do mitzvahs with objects which are permissible. And similarly, an esrog that we use, on Sukkot, that is not an arla. So an arla, not to get into the details of what that is here, but basically we're not allowed to eat the tree's first 3 harvests. And so an esrog that we use cannot come from the tree's first 3 harvests. So that's the basic idea. And so to mitzvahs that we, and so to charity money that we give to tzedakah that is not from stolen charity, from stolen money, and those kind of things. And then the Alter Rebbe just puts a footnote here in brackets, and he says that Arla is from the 3 klipos tzmeos, the 3 impure klipos, which cannot ever rise up and cannot ever be elevated. And so to any kind of mitzvah that comes from sin. So that's the end of this section. So just to recap this and explain this and bring it back to what I was talking about in the beginning. So basically, we are only allowed to do mitzvahs with permissible objects. If we steal money, we're not allowed to use that money and then go give it to charity and say, oh, look, we just did the mitzvah of charity. We are not allowed to take an impure animal and use that to make tefillin. We are not allowed to take a type of fruit, an esrog, like the type of fruit that's known as an esrog, which comes from an arla, that comes from a tree, which is the first 3 harvests, which is forbidden, and use that as our esrog in our lulav and esrog. So in order to do a mitzvah, we need to be using specifically permissible objects. And we already explained previously that these permissible objects receive their vitality from what's known as klipas noga. So it is a husk, so it's not something that totally reveals God, but it's a translucent husk in the sense that it has the ability to reveal God, if only for our actions. That's where our free will comes in, where we have the ability to transform these things. And so basically, to bring it back to the example of the stockholder or the miner and how this all fits in, it's in my mind anyways, is that the way that you can kind of think of the world is that we're living in this world and there are all kinds of different objects within this world. And our purpose in this world is to uncover the godliness inherent here in this world, uncover the hidden reality, which is here, the true reality, which is godliness. The way that we do that is by performing different mitzvahs. The way we perform the mitzvahs is through these different objects that God designated for us as being permissible for us to use as mitzvah objects. So that would be like they give the example of the tefillin strap, which is made out of leather, the mezuzah and the Sefer Torah, which is also made out of animal hide, an esrog, all of these things. When we take these objects, which are really kind of like just neutral in their being, and we use them to perform a mitzvah, we uncover the godliness that's inherent within them. And then our reward becomes this uncovering of the godliness, that now there is this revelation in the world. Just like if a person is mining gold and then they uncover that gold, now that gold is there and now that gold is uncovered and now we have that gold. Or so too, if you're working for a company and then it's, instead of getting paid whatever, if the payment is in stock, it's like you actually see that your work paid off in growing this company, in building up the company. And now the Alter Rebbe continues by applying this idea to giving tzedakah, to giving charity, and how just like other mitzvahs need to be done with permissible objects, so too does charity need to be given with money that is permissible. That's not stolen money, for example. So you can't be Robin Hood, basically. You can't go steal money and then give it to poor people. That will not work. That doesn't constitute a tzedakah. And so we can't do this or anything similar to this. And then the Alter Rebbe says, but when we do these things properly, so when we do keep the mitzvahs that God told us to do and his will, then and we use permissible objects to do these things, then the life force within these objects rises up and becomes nullified and encompassed in the light of the Ein Sof Baruch Hu, in the light of the infinite God, which is, what is this light? This is the will of God that is vested within them. Because now that we're using these objects for their intended use, for a godly use, then they no longer have this concealment of face upon them. So like they no longer conceal the light of God. This similarly happens with the life force of the animal soul that is found within the organs of the body that keeps the mitzvah. So again, a very simple definition of the animal soul. What is the animal soul? It's the life force, the animating life force that causes the body to move and be alive. So when a person does the mitzvahs, then this animal soul that is vested within the body, it also becomes vested in this action. So when a person is actually doing the mitzvah, their soul, their animal soul, is involved in this action. Their animal soul, like we described, is the one that is animating the body to allow them to do the mitzvah. So thus it also rises up, this animal soul itself rises up out of the klipos and becomes encompassed in the holiness of the mitzvah, which is the will of God, and becomes nullified to his light. And so up until now, we've been talking about really overtly physical mitzvahs, like giving charity, taking an esrog, putting on tefillin, making a Sefer Torah, things like that. But now what about other mitzvahs, the Alter Rebbe talks about here, that are more having to do with thought and speech, which again are the other two garments of the soul. So there's action, thought, and speech. So these are mitzvahs like learning Torah or saying Kriya Shema or praying or those kind of things. So even though they are not, we can't call them actual physical action, right? Because it's not the same things like putting on tefillin when you sit and learn Torah or you pray or those kind of things. So what makes them different is that with physical things, we're actually taking these physical objects which are encompassed in klipas noga, right? But if a certain person sits and prays, what physical object are they using? They're not using a physical object to pray, and you're not using a physical object to sit and learn Torah. So the Alter Rebbe says here that there is a physical aspect involved in it, because as it is taught, and this is a citation that the Alter Rebbe now brings from the Gemara of Brachos, page 20b, where it says hiru lav kedibur dame, so which means thought is not a substitute for speech. So meaning to say that there's this idea, if you've ever seen people learning in a yeshiva or things like that, or when you're davening or when you see people who are davening, they're moving their lips, right? So why are they moving their lips? Because moving your lips is actually an essential part of these mitzvahs. So it's not enough if somebody sits and reads from the siddur, but just like says the words silently in their head, or is reading some book of Torah or something like that, and they're just like reading it in their head and they're not saying it out loud. That's not really the proper way to learn or to pray. We're specifically guided to say these words out loud, because when we say these words out loud, it actually brings it into the level of action. And then the Alter Rebbe actually brings another citation, also from the Gemara from Bava Metzia, page 90b, where it says, "Akimat tzfatav havei ma'aseh." So moving one's lips constitutes action. So here we're wondering, what is the action involved in learning Torah and in prayer? And the Alter Rebbe says it is action, even though we're not necessarily using a physical object like we do when we put on tefillin or that kind of thing, but we're using our physical lips. So now it has become action. And now the Alter Rebbe here brings in this whole limitation of the godly soul that we were talking about, because he says that the godly soul, as we mentioned, is not able to move its lips or its mouth or its tongue or its teeth or its which are all these physical things, right? And the only way that the godly soul is able to have any kind of effect on these physical parts of our body is through the animal soul, which is vested within the organs of the body. And the more energy a person puts into speaking these words of Torah or prayer or whatever it is, the more life force they are drawing into this animal soul through these different words. And then the Alter Rebbe here brings a citation from Tehillim, chapter 35, verse 10, where it says, Kol atzmotai tomarna v'gomer, which literally translates as all my bones shall declare. So meaning it's referring to the fact that like that David HaMelech's entire body was, all of his bones were involved in the Torah and the prayer that he was speaking. And then one more citation, this time from Eruvin, page 54a, where it says, Im arucha bechol ramach ivarim mishtameret v'im lav ena mishtameret, which literally means if the Torah abides in all 248 limbs, it is preserved in your memory. Otherwise, it is not preserved. So this is where we're coming to the idea of memory, where the Alter Rebbe now says that what this saying from the Gemara is teaching us is that forgetfulness comes from klipa and from the body and from the animal soul, because these all come from klipas noga, which once again is like the klipas noga is because it's a klipa, it conceals godliness, and so it makes everything murky, and it makes us not be able to see godliness in a true way, which ultimately is what leads to forgetfulness. And so then, but since it's from klipas noga, like it's not from the three impure klipas, then the great thing about it is that when a person goes and then uses these things for godly purposes, for holy purposes, and then we bring all of their energy into the holiness of Torah and into tefillah and into prayer, so then it actually loses this forgetfulness, dissipates. So this is the end of the section. So again, just to kind of sum everything up, what we've been learning about in this chapter, and especially in this section today, is this idea that the really imperative place that physical objects have in our service of God, and how it all works. That basically we need physical objects in order to serve God. And the whole purpose of creation is to transform physical reality and to reveal godliness down here in this physical reality. And the amazing thing is that the way that we're able to do this is actually through our animal soul, because since our animal soul is spiritual on the one hand, but yet it also has this inclination for physicality, and it is the animating force of the body, it is specifically the force that vivifies the body and allows the body to perform different kind of mitzvahs. And when we do these different mitzvahs using physical objects and using our physical body and using our animal soul, since these physical objects, our physical body and our animal soul all stem from klipas noga, what we do when we do these mitzvahs is we literally actually uncover the veil of these klipos, and we reveal the inherent godliness that resides underneath them. And one way to think about this is that we basically obliterate forgetfulness, because forgetfulness, like we talked about, is this like murky state of thought where we don't really see things clearly. We don't remember things as they actually are, kind of like this like dreamlike state. And so when we can uncover the murkiness, we can lose that forgetfulness and we can actually remember things. And when we say remember things, we specifically mean remember Torah, because that is the true reality of the world. So that is it for today, and we're going to continue tomorrow, and I will speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.